The Charlottesville hoax, for those of you who don't know, is that when the president said there are fine people on both sides, CNN continues to report it as if he meant both sides being Antifa on one side and the white supremacists who were literally marching and saying anti-Semitic things in their chanting. Somebody saying it's not a hoax. Boy, it must be your first time on this Periscope. Obviously, and I think any reasonable person would know that when he said there were fine people on both sides, he was talking about of the statue issue, because that's what the protests were about. It was a group of people who came to protest and counter-protest about the existence of Confederate statues. So to say that there are fine people on both sides is a simple statement that there are fine people who like statues, those Confederate statues, and people who don't. And they're fine people, they just disagree on this issue. Now, of course, CNN turned that into the President of the United States intentionally went on live television and through his love to white supremacists who were marching against his daughter, against his own son-in-law, that he obviously has a close relationship, Jared, and against his own grandchildren, and against Israel, who, and here's the fun part, somehow Israel hasn't noticed his alleged anti-Semitism that the CNN seems to think is obvious. Israel didn't notice? So none of it makes sense the way CNN has reported it. And they continue to report it as if that's a fact, as if it doesn't need to be explained, as in some people took it this way. Wouldn't that be the honest way to report it? Because the honest way to report it is some people thought when he said this, he was talking about the white supremacist. Other people think that that's a ridiculous thought. This would be the honest way to say it. A lot of people thought that he was talking about the white supremacist, and that's the way it's been reported. But a lot of other reasonable people said, obviously, that's not the white supremacist. He's just saying two sides of the statue issue. Because the other interpretation is just batshit crazy. And to continue to lie about that, and I think it is a lie at this point. I don't know how to, I don't really, it's, well, let me modify that a little. You can't know what people are thinking. So maybe people think that that's what really happened. But they have been informed. Let me say this with some authority. They have heard the alternative theory. The alternative theory is that he was talking about both sides of the statue issue. That would be a completely normal thing to say for a president. The other one would be ridiculous. Like, it would be insane to even imagine that he went on TV and threw in his lot with the white supremacist as a president of the United States and thought that will go okay. All right. So the way CNN reports it is so absurd. It's hard to come up with a theory of how they could do this repeatedly once they've been informed that they interpreted it wrong. How do you keep doing it? Either you're liars, or you really, really believe it's true, despite, I would say, fairly obvious evidence to the contrary. Scott, you shared this with Chris Hayes, and he still reports it as real. Yeah, I don't think anything can shake them out of it. And here's why. I think there are two pillars of the Trump hatred that if the folks with TDS lose them, they lose too much of their worldview. The two pillars are that the Charlottesville hoax was real and that the Russia collusion was real. Those are pretty much, a lot of the hate of this president are concentrated on those two pillars, and both of them are hoaxes. And I would say fairly obvious hoaxes, wouldn't you say? Now, there were a whole bunch of other things that people said about him, but those are sort of melted away. He's not acting like a dictator. He's not crazy. He's not getting bad results on the economy. He's not finding that other countries won't work with us. None of that's happening. So there's just all these other things that were said about this president, which are very clearly not the case now. If you look at what people worried about, right? If you go back to 2016 and say, what are the people who were experiencing the hysteria, what were they worrying about? Well, now you don't have to worry about if those things will happen because you've got 2 years to look at it and you go, okay, nothing crazy happened, at least crazy in the way that matters to anybody. Other countries still work with us. The economy is screaming. We're probably safer than we've ever been if you consider North Korea, being nice, etc. So all you have left, the only thing you have left to maintain your ego, and that's what it is at this point. For the anti-Trumpers, they've bet their entire ego on Trump being bad in whatever ways bad means to them. And if they lose the Charlottesville hoax, the whole racism thing is going to start to fall apart. Because if you look at what he's done, from releasing Alice Johnson, is that her name, to working to improve things with prison reform, to having the best economy ever for the middle class and the lower middle class. These are all things that are just directly beneficial to the community that people said he was going to discriminate against. And even if you look at the immigration question, before we became educated about border security, people just, were tribal and they just were on each other's sides. But we've all been educated. And that sort of changes how you see the border question. I think there's been enough education about a real need for border security to the point that even the Democrats have voted for it in the past. Apparently they're supporting it at the moment. So even right now, we're watching the Democrats agree with the president, right? Now they're disagreeing on dollar amount, but they now agree on principle. Am I wrong about that? The objection to the border fence or wall or whatever you want to call it, the objection was always on principle. The objection was not really ever about money. You fact check me on that, right? But it wasn't really a budget problem because it was small compared to the whole budget. So the moment that the Democrats climb down from it's a moral objection and they climb down to, well, suppose the budget is smaller, they've given away their entire principle. They have completely abandoned their own argument that they have been hammering the president for 3 years. For years, they've been hammering this guy, only to climb down in the face of actual negotiations and light being shined on by the public. Because there's a real problem. There's a real problem. So I think the Charlottesville hoax and I think the Russia collusion are going to be so important for the mental health of the anti-Trumpers, because if they lose those two things, they have to admit that they've been wrong about the most important thing in their lives. I'm talking about the people who are in the political domain and reporting on it. That they would be wrong about the most important thing that they've believed since 2016. People can't really do that. The average normal mind cannot make that much of a transition and survive, right?